upstate New York, California was the place where they had perfect education system, from kindergarten through university. We're a long way from that now. I think we're 49th. Fighting for that last slot with Louisiana, and they don't even speak English in a lot of parts down there. Right? Second highest sales tax and the fourth highest income tax in the United States. That's a problem, folks, because it's driving out the people that generate revenue that will allow us to solve some of these problems. So what's our solution? With this initiative, we're going to address the whole gamut of special interests that control government, whether it's the public employee unions negotiating for lucrative contracts at the expense of taxpayers, or corporations that try to get no-bid contracts because of cronyism. Either one is a problem, and we address both. So it bans both corporate and labor union contributions direct to candidates. It prohibits government contractors from contributing money to the government officials who are about to award them a contract. I always thought that was a conflict of interest, right? But it goes on all the time. Well, we're going to prohibit that. It prohibits both corporations and labor unions from mandatory collection of political funds from their employees through a payroll deduction system. In other words, we're going to get the government out of the business of taking money out of your paycheck to give to political purposes that will expand government. Right? And then it makes all political contributions. You can't even sign up to have a bank draft taken out of your account unless you authorize it in writing. We're turning it from an opt-out system that they made unbelievably difficult to an opt-in system. And having run for Attorney General last year, I had to collect money to fund our campaign by persuading people that they should support me. I think everybody else ought to do the same thing. All right? So that's what we're going to do there. And I'm not going to get you to say, you want this job, you got to sign this and give me that, that authority forevermore. I've got to persuade you every single year, which means I've got to demonstrate to you that the political money you've donated to my political action committee has been worth it to you, has supported the causes you agree with. And if I quit doing that, you get to send your money someplace else, or, heaven forbid, keep it for yourself. All right? Now, what happened after this? In Utah, and Utah did this a few years ago, and it's been upheld by the courts. 80% reduction in union PAC contributions the first year. Later cycles averaged a 50% reduction. They figured out ways around it at some point, but still, that's pretty significant. Independent expenditures, unchanged. So if people have money and they want to make independent expenditures to express their First Amendment rights, they're still allowed to do so. The Constitution says so, and as I speak the first half of this talk, I think that matters, right? Personal contributions to candidates, unchanged. You still have the right to do what you've always had. But the ban on union and corporate contributions to candidates. Special interests in this state, 15 of them spent over $1 billion in politics. Unions, corporations, Indian tribes, and business associations. Together they dominate politics in Sacramento. Right? And a lot of that would be banned under this initiative. Now let me give you why we've kind of broadened this. Some of you may recognize this, at least some components of it are similar to paycheck protection initiatives that have been tried a couple of times and failed. Well, we did an extensive bit of polling on this. I just want to give you some of the numbers to show why I am so excited about this strategic reform for California that will make possible down the road a lot of other necessary reforms. They're spending millions of dollars in Sacramento. We need to cut off campaign contributions so the politicians will pay attention to voters and the needs of citizens rather than the special interests. 81% agree with that. 65% strongly agree. These are numbers that political consultants love to see going into a campaign. If you could do only one of the following, what would you do? Cut off the public employee unions or limit the influence of big corporations? The state's roughly evenly split. That means if we do it on just the unions, we probably lose. When you package it together, this thing receives overwhelming support. Ban union and corporations together, 65% yes. These are wonderful margins. Making all political contributions by government employees voluntary instead of the mandatory deductions from their paychecks, 66% say yes, 50% strongly so. These margins are huge. Require written consent before I use your money for political causes that you may not support. 69% favor that. Right. The significance of that is that the margins are so large that when the inevitable volume of money gets brought in to defeat this thing, they won't be able to close that 40% gap. They may close 20 points, but not 40 points. And so the prospects of success on election day are huge. Treat all special interests the same. Neither unions or corporations can make direct contributions anymore. Huge, huge numbers. So there's the website, stopspecialinterestmoney.org. You can read more about it. Californians Against Special Interests is the name of the committee. If anybody wants to write a check to help support it, this is, I think, no matter what your issue is in restoring sensible government to California, unless we break the back of the control that the interests have on Sacramento, that led to things like that retroactive pension, we're not going to solve the state's problems. I think structurally, this is the most important thing we've got going here. Now let me close with one other thing. And again, you know, the former head of the AFL-CIU, George Meany, was opposed to unionizing public employees. He thought that was a contradiction of the common interest. James Madison talks about groups that would become vested in government for their own interests rather than the common good. And all of the structures of our Constitution are designed to prevent those factions, to use Madison's language from Federalist 10, from gaining control of government. Well, we've got a faction of government employees that have gained control of government, not for the common good, but for their own interest. Right? And it used to be that, you know, back in the 70s when Jerry Brown signed that collective bargaining thing, the standard line was, you know, if you went into government work, you probably got lower pay, but you had better job security. How many remember that kind of, right? And here's some numbers. This is, and I put this together 6 months ago, and I forget what area of employment I was looking for, but comparable government and private sector positions. Here was kind of a standard. So you got in the blue there, you've got the base pay in the private sector and the base pay in the public sector. So that story we all remember from the 1970s was true. And you add on the benefits, you know, and it brought it up another 25 or 30%, okay? And that was the story. Now, that was not quite accurate because there were other intangible benefits that you got from being a government employee that actually made it even then more lucrative. When you had more lucrative sick leave policies that most of the government agencies had versus the private sector, larger number of holidays or vacation time or personal days or premium for doing night shifts or whatever, a lot of things that existed in the public sector that didn't exist at all in the private sector or existed more lucratively in the public sector. Social Security waiver, job security. When you add all those things, I thought even back in the 70s, that was a better gig than the private sector on average. But let me show you what's happened since we went to collective bargaining. This would not stand up to the Stanford studies, but I'm going to get these guys on board because there would be, I just kind of extrapolated some numbers, but we're going to work with them. Yeah, all right, but you look at the rates of return, even in times of recession, when the private sector is contracting salaries and benefits, the public sector is still growing them at double-digit rates because of contracts that are entered into years before. And you extrapolate that over the 30 years since we went to collective bargaining, the delta, the differential between the private sector and the public sector salaries is huge. Right? And now it's gotten so big that it's now deemed an entitlement to keep it. And so we had in Los Angeles County a huge shortfall in our Los Angeles Unified School District budget last year. And it was 10% expenses exceeded revenues. And so they needed to figure out how to accomplish this 10%. And it was clear that they were not going to get a 10% tax increase through the voters who were struggling with keeping their jobs and their mortgages paid and what have you. And the right answer was to take a 10% pay cut across the board. We don't have to cut a single service or raise an additional single dollar in new revenue. And look, given what's gone on over the last 30 years, they're still in pretty good shape compared to their counterparts in the private sector. That's the right answer. What did the LA Unified School District Union leaders say? No way. cut 10% of our staff, cut 10% of the teachers. The parents will then scream bloody murder that they, instead of 30 kids in the classroom, you've got 40 and they're hanging from the rafters, and they'll insist on giving us the additional revenues, right? So they made it either cut services or increase revenues. Those were the only two options. It's a false choice because this was not only a third option, but is the only viable one. How many have heard of the Laffer curve? Right? My son's government teacher in high school said that Laffer was just a theory. And so, okay, so here's the theory. If I have a zero tax rate, how much revenues will the government raise? If I have a 100% tax rate, how much revenues will the government raise? Because nobody will work. And at some point, I have a tax rate where they make money, right? They do raise revenue. So there's got to be a Laffer curve of some kind. We don't know whether it's bell-shaped over here or bell-shaped over here, but it's got to exist someplace, all right? You can't raise more revenue in this state by increasing the tax rates because all that will do is raise more revenue for Texas. Governor Perry may like it, but I don't care. All right? This was the only viable solution. And yet, because of the structural impediment, because of the powers given to the union to buy the people that are on the other side of the table on the contracts that they negotiate, they can ignore provisions in our Constitution, they can ignore statutory law, they can create these contracts that are bankrupting the rest of us. So let me close with this. I talked about it initially, our Constitutional Litigation Center. We're doing these taxpayer suits on the retroactive pension. There will come another round of litigation when these contracts start getting breached because we elect people who will stare down this thing. So no, we're going to cut 10% because we don't have the revenue. You can't do that. It's in our contract. Yeah, well, the contract's breached. Sorry. Now, there's a constitutional provision that says the states can't impair the obligations of contracts. And 2 centuries ago, the Supreme Court said that that means the states can't breach their own contracts. But the Supreme Court has also recognized that I can't enter into multi-year contracts imposing obligations on future generations and future legislatures that undermines their ability to govern. Isn't that what we've done here? Right? So as a matter of constitutional law, we will be defending any local government, city council, agency, whatever, that wants to get out from under the onerous obligations of these contracts that were illegitimately entered into in the first place and that are bankrupting their communities and foisting burdens not just on themselves, but on our kids and grandkids. This is not just a fiscal issue anymore. It's a question of the rule of law, but it is also a fundamental moral issue. We're handing a tab to our grandkids. And it's not like we defeated a Nazi Germany threat to their future livelihood. Or it's not even that we built a highway system that we can hand off to them. We're just handing them the tab for monies that will have long been spent and gone. And that's unjust. Our Constitution begins with a preamble that talks about securing the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity. It's time to start thinking a little bit about our posterity, and this is the way we're doing it. Thanks very much.
If we have to sort out, just repeat the question. We'll do.
Okay.